Hello, everybody, and welcome to the God's Heart podcast. My name is Jonathan Faulkner. I got a special show for you today. We're going to do a pastor's roundtable. We're going to talk about what it's been like to be a younger pastor in the midst of this pandemic. I think all three of us have been pastoring for less than 3 years. But before we get to that, before we bring in our two panelists today, I want to make an announcement, because after the Ravi Zacharias podcast, which was now 3 weeks ago, we haven't done one because I've had some doctor's appointments and some different things that have interrupted the schedule. But I heard from a lot of you, and you said one of the things that the podcast could really benefit from is a co-host. And so, and then someone said, yeah, you should have Katie as your co-host. And so Katie and I were in conversation the last 2 weeks. And after she has prayed about it, she is going to Katie Mason will come on as our co-host here, and we'll continue to do types of interviews and different things, but we'll also talk about current events in the hope of creating a biblically based framework for wisdom in approaching what is going on in our world today, because there's so much happening, and the Bible, being the source of wisdom that it is, needs to be the place where we are going to discuss how we walk through these things. So on this beautiful spring morning, when the snow is melting in everywhere but upstate New York, I want to welcome in our panelist, Pastor Stephan Clark.
Thank you.
And Pastor Mike Matlack. Both of you kind of tell us where you're at. Give us a quick overview of where you're at.
Yeah, I'm in South Canada, also known as Corinth, New York. Corinth is a dinky little town in the northern area of it's about an hour north of Albany, so close to the capital district of New York. Former mill town, so kind of a funny mix of retirees, people who used to grow up in and really love the town, and then sort of like becoming a bedroom community now. So it's a funny little mix, but it's a little mountain town, an old Presbyterian church there. And I started in August of 2019. So going on just under a year and a half.
Mike?
Yeah, I pastor in Western Virginia in a small town, very rural. It's what you would call in the old days maybe a factory town. Used to be 4 factories, and now there's one paper mill, and that drives the local economy. And because that is the only source of employment, main employment, it does become, generally speaking, an older populated area, because the kids grow up and end up going to school, and they have to go where the jobs take them, and that might not be here unless you want to work at the mill. My church is a small EPC, Evangelical Presbyterian church. We have just recently moved into the EPC within the last several years, but they had made that move before I got there. And like Stephan, I started pastoring here about a year and a half ago. It was summer of 2019.
Awesome. And I am in, for those of you, because I don't really talk about this I haven't really talked about this yet, but I am in Buffalo Center, Iowa. If you look at a map of Iowa or the Minnesota border, we're about 6 miles south of Minnesota. So if Minnesota decides to invade, we're the largest obstacle for them heading south for a little while. But we're a little farming community. And we also have the school, the local combined school district for this area. So there's a lot of opportunity. We have a lot of younger families, but we also have a lot of older retirees in town, and the churches are largely older, though some are doing a good job of reaching younger populations, the younger population. So, it's a mix here, because there is some farming industry around here. There is the school, and we have a fully active main street with its own grocery, which is huge for a young pastor to have that. And we have our own hardware store here. So there's a lot of opportunity here. The churches are just most of the churches are older. And so again, a lot of opportunity. I want to say every single one of us, because I started in May of 2019, every single one of us has been in less than 2 years in our positions. And the reason I wanted to talk with these guys is because we kind of, you get your seminary education, you get that degree, they hand it to you. And a year into your first ministry, actually not even a year in, you do your first annual meeting. For me as a Congregationalist, because I'm a 4C pastor. And then they tell you, oh, it's time. You got to shut down. There is a pandemic on the way. And so most of us celebrated our first year as in the middle of a pandemic. And so we want to talk about what that was like and how seminary didn't really prepare us for this, but also how it has affected us in general as younger pastors. So first of all, what are you guys doing for services? And what have you been doing from the start?
Well, I can speak a little bit about that. When the pandemic first hit us, we did, I think what a lot of people did is we shut down for about, I can't remember exactly, but 6 or 8 weeks or something like that, where we did not have anybody in the church except for myself and our pianist. We streamed services online during that time period, but that was really hard because the pandemic and the restrictions came in the midst of Lent last year.
Mm-hmm.
And so we did Easter service and the Holy Week activities. A lot of that was online, and some of that we would have partnered with other churches usually in the community, but it was something that each of us kind of either was not doing or we did in an isolated manner. When Virginia did start to ease the restrictions, we talked to the session and we felt as long as we could do everything that the state wanted us to do as far as the social distancing and cleaning, if we could implement those things, we would meet in person. But we also continued to stream online, Sunday school on Zoom and service on Facebook, making a lot of calls and everything like that. And because there are certain people in our church who are elderly who can't even get on a stream,
Mm-hmm.
no fault to their own, but it's just not a possibility for them. So it was a lot of calling on the phone and just checking up on them as we could. And I think it's been real hard, but I think that we've grown a lot. And just real quickly, right now, we are, still meeting in person, but we're about 50% of our congregation is able to meet at our church in person, and they're comfortable worshiping in that environment. And 50% of us are worshiping online. And by the grace of God, we have not lost any members. We've actually picked up a few people worshiping with us during this time, and I thank God for that. But it definitely has been challenging, and right now we're not all together physically. We are all together spiritually thanks to technology.
Steve?
Yeah, we closed in March, and I also just decided it would be a good idea to get married in the middle of all that chaos. So that was, marriage isn't foolish, but getting married in the pandemic while pastoring a church, there were some interesting times. But we got married in June, and so we decided with the church basically I would get married and get that behind us, and then we would move towards reopening. So we didn't reopen until July, at which point we started doing in-person and live stream. We were doing live stream services only until July. We stayed open in person until January, and then there was a surge of COVID all across the country, but it was pretty bad in our area too. So we closed back down until February when the surge abated some. And we basically put some metrics in place, like when our county's numbers are below a certain threshold, we'll meet. And when they go above, we'll return to virtual services, which thankfully we haven't had to return to virtual again since then. But we've basically been doing the in-person and live stream combo more or less since July. We also did an outdoor service until probably October or maybe beginning of November last year. Where we didn't require masks, and that kind of opened up the door for a few more people. While we had our in-person service going, we just put a speaker outdoors, and we had an audio-only service outdoors. And that was a neat way to include a few more people. So we might be bringing that back at some point when the snow finally melts here in upstate New York in like August. But until then, we'll continue. Hopefully, we'll be able to stay in person so long as there's not another resurgence in cases. And yeah, outside of that, we tried a few virtual things, which that's not really the culture here. So there were a few people that jumped on virtual devotionals and community groups, but not a whole lot. We did a few outdoor events. We've been doing like some outdoor skiing and snowshoeing events, and that's been fun. But yeah, it is sort of a treading water season. Like we haven't lost a ton of people. We haven't gained a ton of people. We're probably 30 or 40% are back in person attending, and the rest are online. But it does sort of feel like, okay, keep treading the water till we get on the other side, and then we can kind of plan more towards the future. That's where we're at.
Yeah, I've got my board planning for the future, but as a church, it is because, you don't know what you're going to look like. Right when things do open back up and people do start coming back. So I'm sure that this was the same for both of you. We didn't have any infrastructure for online services at all. And so what we were doing was we were pre-recording our services on Saturday, and then I would edit and upload the service to YouTube. And we did that from March into April until Rachel said, you just need to stop, because it was consuming all of Saturday.
Yeah. I did this thing for a while, and it's not pleasant.
Did your wife tell you to stop?
No, Cole told me to stop.
And I was most churches, that's how they start with their video ministry, right? They start with the pre-recorded service that they then distribute, and then you build up to a full live stream. Well, we're basically starting all that from scratch. I had no idea how to live stream for video. I knew how to do it for audio, but I had no idea how to do it for video. And so we basically built a full live stream, a brand new online presence in 4 months, and did what most churches take 10 years to do. And again, as I'm sure you guys did as well, it's we were shut down. I have been following all of the research on the virus, partially because I'm fascinated, but partially because it's more informative on things to do than listening to state and national health officials, unfortunately, because everything got so politicized. But we're back to the hybrid model. We were shut down from March, April, and May. We tried to do an outdoor service for Easter, and we had a blizzard on Easter, full blizzard, Easter morning, which was exciting. Not really. But we're going to try and do an outdoor service for Easter this year, and hopefully we won't have a blizzard, but, knock on whatever this surface is here. And so we we reopened again in June to the hybrid model. We, like you, Steve, got probably have 30 or 40% of the people back in person. And again, just not sure what we're going to look like when all the dust settles and everyone's vaccinated and we're back to in person, probably full in person. We're still going to have a live stream, I think. But we also, the other thing we've been doing is a radio ministry. So we've been on the local radio station every Sunday from 12:30 to 1 doing whatever sermon I had for Sunday morning, so that because we have people that can't do digital media, and so they needed that aspect of to facilitate worship. My regional pastors had a great analogy for all this. He said that we are the scattered and the gathered church. And that's been really helpful, I think, for my people processing a lot of this. Because, the church is never closed, but we had to suspend in-person meetings. So what's been your biggest challenge? We'll start with you, Steve.
Ooh, yeah, pick me. So I hate pandemics. They're really bad and they're terrible. And I think they are personally engineered to be my least favorite thing in the universe, because I am a 96% extrovert and I was banned from having friends. And that was the worst thing that could ever happen. So my biggest challenge has been probably my own sin, because I really want to be people pleasing and I really hate conflict. And I really want to meet people's expectations to dull my frustrations by spending my time with people. So like all of those avenues were completely obliterated, and I just had to wrestle with my own insufficiency. And that's been really difficult. It's been a really discouraging season in some ways, and it's been really challenging personally. That being said, it's also been really enriching. Like, it's been formative for me because I've had to learn how to make unpopular decisions and stand by them. I've had to learn how to face conflict and stand up for what I think is the right thing. I've had to learn how to not necessarily do something because I think it's going to make people happy, but because I might think it's the right call to make. And I think that's basically the biggest challenge here is the general approach of our community is pretty different than the approach that I and my family have taken. So I have to say no a lot. People are maybe more ready for in-person meetings or more eager for reduced restrictions. And it feels like I've had to hold the line a lot. I've had to say no a lot. And as a people pleaser and as somebody who wants to meet expectations, that's been really discouraging and difficult personally. The conflict has also been tough. Like, there are people on different ends of the spectrum in the church, and that's led to some meetings where I thought heads might get ripped off, and thankfully they didn't. But I think that's the biggest challenge for me personally is that sense of I can't meet expectations. Like, everybody has a different definition of what it looks like to do a good job right now. Some people would say, if you're meeting virtually, you're doing a good job because you've held the line, you've kept people safe, and you're doing the right thing. And others would say, if you ever shut down, you're not doing a good job, right? Because the church should keep on meeting and it shouldn't give in to government restrictions, and the people of God shouldn't be living in fear. And you've got totally different definitions of what it means to do a good job. And as someone who's really driven by expectations and accomplishment and achievement, I've really had to learn how my self-worth can't be wrapped into what people think of me or what people think about the work that I'm doing. So it's been a really sanctifying season and learning that I'm beloved by God and that I'm valued as his child and not as whether I'm doing a good job or not, especially when it's very unclear what a good job is. But that being said, it's been a really tricky season.
Mike?
Yeah, Steve, I knew that you were an extrovert. Like,
we all knew Steve was an extrovert. The first day he entered the cafeteria at Gordon Conwell. And made friends with everybody.
Be my friend! Yeah.
And when you said 96%, I was like, yep. I've always been, and I don't know, I might have talked to this with you, John, back in the day, but I've always been a little bit more introverted. But I think I'm more like 50-50 now, and I might be the extroverted introvert now type thing, because I do, and this is something, this all relates to the challenges and stuff like that, like, and also my personal theology. I believe that God has created each of us with a physical body, with a mental capacity, a brain, and also with our heart and our spirit. And so a lot of times we think of faith as just a spiritual thing, and that is so important.
Did you hear that? Hold on. Mike has been in Virginia for a year and a half. He just said that's a spiritual thing. It's rubbing off on him.
What do you
I grew up in Appalachia, man. I know. I've heard.
I've picked up a few things like the Ewans and y'all, and I'm fixing to do this. I'm plumb wore out. All those fun phrases. And honestly, I mean, I think, and this is a little different, but when you're around certain people, I don't know why. I think it's just how we are as human beings. You want to relate to them. And so I find myself just talking a little bit like people that I hang out with. This friend in college, he liked to use the phrase cool beans. And so I picked up that phrase and started using cool beans with my youth kids. And they looked at me kind of funny, like, what are you saying? But I picked it up because I was friends with him. And I don't know. It is rubbing off on me, John, definitely. Sorry, but to get back to what I was saying before, I think that we often confine faith to a spiritual thing. And obviously that is so important. That is so right. It is about our heart, being in the right place, with ourselves, with our neighbor, with God. We worship in spirit. The word says that. But I also believe that God created us with a physical body. We're his hands and we're his feet. And he also created us with a mind. I think the mind often gets overlooked. But we're supposed to study. We're supposed to meditate on the word, and we use our brain really to process everything and get it from the physical into our heart. And so for me, those three components are just so important. And so when the pandemic started and we couldn't have that physical meeting as the body of Christ, and again, this is for me just my personal theology with communion. Yes, it is the spiritual experience, but it's also the physical fellowship that you share with one another there, because we will have a physical, a mental, a spiritual gathering in heaven around the table with the Lord. And so when you worship virtually, and we have to do that for this season, especially if people have pre-existing conditions and other health issues, and age, unfortunately, we're just missing that physical component of how we worship and how we relate to other people. And in all my conversations with people, that's probably been the biggest challenge, whether you are introverted or extroverted. That has definitely been a big deal. And that's probably been the biggest challenge, I think, towards being the church, but at the same time, it's pushed us to be creative and flexible and try different things. And just for me, my personal struggle in all of this was I'd been pastor at my church for about 9 months when the pandemic hit. And for me, my leadership style, I don't like to change things right away. I like to get to know the people, hear them out, get to a point where we trust each other, and I understand their needs and their interests. So after being there about 9 months, I'm starting to, feel things out a little more and understand where we want to go as a congregation. So it was 9 months. We were in Lent. Summer was coming up, and I was ready to hit the ground running. I was like, that was where I felt personally at my stage as a pastor at the church. And then the pandemic kind of put the brakes on all of that. So I was like, I had all this energy and I was like ready to go. and then I had to stop. And then I had to not just stop, but I had to figure all the stuff out with virtual church and the technology and everything you're talking about, John, with, streaming services. And it really was like stop the trajectory that I was thinking of going in. And now there's a whole nother trajectory, a whole bunch of learning to do and new things to try out. So it was kind of like, that was probably personally the most frustrating thing for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think for me it was giving up Monday visitations, because like Steve, I'm a introvert, but I've set my schedule very specifically just to ensure my own health and mental sanity. And so Mondays were my visitation days, because Mondays are the day, when most pastors, if they're going to struggle with depression, will struggle with it on Monday, because you're second guessing everything you said in your sermon on Sunday. So when the nursing home closed down, and nursing homes closed down, and we couldn't do pastoral, and the conference suspended in-person visits, which they just now gave us some instruction on that. So I'm hoping to implement that starting in April. But that was the hardest thing for me, because I thrive off of person-to-person interaction. I love people. I enjoy hanging out with humans. And as much as I love hanging out with my wife and daughter, we were as families, as a family, really starting to get to know two younger families here, and we're really enjoying getting to know them. And we're starting to do like once a month Sunday afternoon get-togethers, and things just, with everything shut down, it's been the younger people who've been taking things more seriously. And so we're all like, well, we're going to give this up so that we can make sure we're all healthy. And, we don't want to become a place where the virus spreads and all that stuff, kind of like the same approach we've been taking to church. And so the social interaction part has been hard for me, but I also am a feeler, about 50-50 feeler judger on the Myers-Briggs. So like everything that's gone on, all the grief associated, and just to an extent my own personal theology, that we're built and we're made in the image of God, male and female. Like you, Mike, we have a physical body. God created it, and he created us for fellowship and communion with one another and with him. And not being able to gather in person and see my congregation in person, that's been hard. One of the, you have to fight having a negative attitude. And that's been one of the hardest things for me. And as someone who does a lot with pastoral health and following a lot of the metrics that have been out through the pandemic, it's been discouraging to be a pastor in these last 12 months. They're talking about they had Lifeway just had a poll out for pastors. I believe it was Lifeway. And they to Steve's point about conflict, they found that 80% of pastors had experienced some kind of censorship in the last year, and 79% of those pastors, I believe is what the poll said, had experienced it in the form of someone yelling at them or a passive aggressive note in the mail or something like that. And so that, just the fact that I follow all that has been discouraging. The other thing that was out is that, we had already been accelerating the amount of people who were leaving the ministry, and the pandemic is only going to make that worse. So as the church in the U.S., There are three of us on this podcast. According to the statistics, in once we hit the 5-year mark, one of us will be the only one left in ministry, and that is way too high a number. If you're looking at 1 in 3, it's crazy. So that's been the frustrating and part. And Lifeway had redone the state of the pulpit survey and found that things were better for pastors at the beginning of 2020 when that survey came out. And then they said, we're basically going to lose a lot of that this year. So it's been frustrating, but yeah. So speaking of health, how have you guys, Steve, you have found a incredible way to help with your mental health. So I want to go to Mike first, because I want you to talk about what you've been doing. Mike, how have you been handling mental health through the pandemic?
Yeah, it's I'm generally a very positive person. I always look for the solution, and even if it doesn't come as soon as I want, I know, I hold on, faith. So I try to stay hopeful and positive, of course, but there's so many, like you were saying with the polls and stuff like that, John, there's so many needs out there. And as a pastor, you hear all the needs of your congregation and the community, and the prayer requests are coming in and looking at the COVID numbers and things like that. It can get very discouraging, of course. So for me, it is the Sunday school answer. It's the basics. It's being in the Word, praying all the time. And obviously as pastors, we should be doing that. But just setting aside that personal time, not to be studying for the sermon this coming week, but studying for your own edification and spending that own quality time with God is so helpful. The pandemic actually had me on the phone a lot with a lot of people, because that was the only way we could communicate. And my family lives in New Jersey. I live in Virginia. And so I admit I was never that good about calling my family on the phone, even when I was in seminary in Massachusetts. But throughout this pandemic, I've really, I think, grown with my family in talking on the phone a lot with them multiple times during the week with all of them, my mom, my dad, my brother, having separate conversations with each of them. That has been very sustaining for me. And finally, I know it's hard and not everyone is able to do this. But, there have been a few people that I'm able to meet with in small settings, and that has helped. And we try to be safe about, meeting and who we meet with. And there's one group that I do meet with. It's a regular thing. So we all know each other. And I know that's not a possibility for everyone. But having like a limited amount of quality time with another person, that's been very helpful. Just the idea of someone being there with you, and that could be on the phone, or it could be in somebody's living room, and that's kind of just that. I think that's been helpful for me.
All right, Steve, explain the socks.
Yeah. First, let me actually talk about the really boring parts that I think might actually be of some practical use to people, and then I'll talk about the actual important part of self-care, which is related to socks. I think for me, the two practices that have been really crucial are protecting my Sabbath. I take Fridays off. I don't look at my email. I don't talk to anyone. If somebody calls, like, the only way I will do something on a Friday related to work is if somebody is dying. It's very much like keeping that boundary at all costs has been absolutely critical for me, just so I have a day to lay down the expectations, lay down the grief, the challenges. That's been huge. Having a weekly Sabbath is probably the biggest reason I'm still functional right now.
And then to that.
community, like Mike was saying. I'm not able to really meet a lot of people in person, but I have a weekly phone call with Sue Kim, friend of seminary, and then there's a few others I try to just make sure I'm regularly in touch with. So I think those are really key pieces for me. Having people who trust me, who know me, making sure that I'm like not getting lost in my own head, but I'm regularly walking with others who can speak into my life. And then the most important thing is once each year, which it's gaining steam, so it might become a more common thing. But there's the sock bracket, which was last May. I was just sad, and everyone was sad, and the world was falling apart, and all the news was terrible, and social media was like the seventh circle of hell. But get this, people need to have joy in their lives, and I have a lot of funny socks. So I took pictures of 16 or 32 of my best sock pairs and made a bracket out of them on Facebook, and people got way more into it than anybody ever should have. And then for Christmas, I got about 16 more pairs of socks mailed to my house, so I did it again in January. And it's just like gaining steam. There are like people, my favorite thing is when people who don't know one another start getting in really intense arguments over whether Taurus is a superior sock to the mugshot emu, which is actually an ostrich. And it just gets out of control, and it's really, really fantastic. But I think
I heard a red-faced Australian yelled at you over that.
Yeah, well, what are you going to do? But in all seriousness, I think like carving out deliberate space for levity has been really important for me, because everything is really serious and really hard and really difficult. So to have space where you can just laugh over something silly has been really, really life-giving. For the record, I'm wearing cherry socks right now. But yeah, I think I don't do as good enough a job of it as I wish I did. But I think carving out spaces for levity and laughter and joy right now is absolutely crucial.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest and say this year I've taken, my mental health has been so. Once we got to summer last year, we took a trip where we isolated in Massachusetts with Rachel's family for a week because I was just so exhausted that I wasn't, it wasn't going to be long before I physically burned out.
Yeah.
And then I came back, and between August and September, I did 4 funerals.
Oof.
And by the end of October, I'd done those 4 funerals, and I'd lost 2 family members, one expectedly, one unexpectedly, and by the end of November. And I've been really blessed by my board that they have allowed me to make adjustments to my schedule as needed. That's been nice. And the church has been good about not calling me on my Sabbath, which is Thursday for me. I take Thursdays off. I think one of the big things that's been grounding, other than all the usual stuff that goes into your relationship with the Lord, Bible study, reading, all those different things, has been my daughter. She just turned 2, so she's at that age now where everything is just this absolutely magical thing, including ostrich socks, and that's been very grounding for me, because she's seeing the world, and she's singing songs, and we put her in a front facing car seat, so now car rides are cool, and now we have a second one coming in June.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you. And so we're, that has been a good distraction from everything that's been going on. And I severely backed off social media. Like I have not participated in a debate on social media, except one that was really a non-debate. It was just kind of funny. I wanted to attack some people under your sock bracket thing, just playfully, and I decided not to do that. Pizza socks should have won it all. Just
don't worry, you can find a support group there, I'm sure.
But And then, just we've the 4C's done a good job of connecting us together as pastors. And I wanted to do more of this with our little Facebook group that we have, the little Facebook Messenger chat that the three of us and Neil are part of. And it's just been such an insane year. But the 4C's done a good job of connecting us as pastors, making sure that leadership is hearing us, hearing where we are, giving us wisdom where they can, and that's been big. But again, I am exhausted. I'm just exhausted. This last year, when I've got paternity leave coming up in June, and I'm looking forward to not having any church related things to worry about for 4 to 6 weeks. So it's going to be nice. And the other thing that happened this last year, and Mike was there for this, I did my orientation virtually, which I think was more tedious than if you're in person, because as someone who's legally blind, if they were all sitting in the church gallery, I wouldn't be able to see all of them, but you all were right there in front of me. And by the way, Mike, my church members watched that, all 3.5 hours of it.
You did a good job, buddy. You really did. And some of the people were asking like really tough questions. I was trying to pitch you some softballs. No, I'm just kidding. You did a really good job with that. And I was there also for when we kind of kicked you out and were talking about you behind your back. But it was all really good things. I know that because I think some of your congregation was actually not just watching, but on that panel too.
Yeah, we had 2 people.
Yeah, and they were just really thrilled with you. So that was fun. And that's another thing that I've been through. Didn't mean to interrupt you, but virtual presbytery meetings. And it's hard to attend General Assembly sometimes because our denomination usually has that out in Colorado or other places. And I would like to get there sometime. This past summer, they were supposed to have it in Tennessee. And I was like so excited because I was like, I can actually get to that. It's not that far away. But then the pandemic happened. But we did it virtually. So it's kind of cool. We can attend meetings virtually. That's an interesting thing because it means more participation. But then you kind of have to change the rules as well because we use, like Robert's Rules of Assembly. And sometimes that doesn't always translate well to a virtual meeting. So we had to make adjustments and things like that. My pet peeve is they always end the question before everyone has had a chance to vote. And I don't think they mean to go that fast, but they just do. And I know there's a lot of more elderly pastors on there that might be thinking about the question and want to give a response, but then all of a sudden the survey gets taken away and we've already voted on something. But anyway, that's just a little pet peeve of mine with our meetings. We're learning with all that.
Our conference, our annual RAG, it was virtual last year. It'll be virtual this year too. So, which we are looking forward to Rhode Island and all that fun stuff. But now it's going to be 2022 before we go to Rhode Island again. So, but
great place, great land. Steve Clark spent a solid 16 years of his life there. So I highly recommend.
So let's talk about some of the other things that went on last year, because it wasn't just the pandemic. And I think the pandemic, one of the effects of the pandemic is that it fueled a lot of it because a lot of people were home. And I know this was true about my congregation. There were a lot of people that were sitting at home with the news cycle on, the 24-hour news cycle on, and the news cycle was just negative. There was almost no attempt at positivity. And it created a negative feedback loop where, if all you're experiencing is negative, then you yourself become fairly negative yourself, which is why I appreciated the silly sock bracket so much. showed me that someone was keeping their wits about them in the midst of all this. But how did you address some of the other things that went on? George Floyd, the riots and protests, the election. My word, the election. How did you address some of these other things and maybe encourage your people away from the negativity that was going on in the overall culture?
One of the things I tried to focus on, right, because one of the biggest challenges I've noticed is whether it's pandemic or election or whatever, people trust different news sources, people trust different numbers, you're starting with different base assumptions, and if you're trying to do an argument by data, it's not usually going to work. And if it is going to work, it's not going to be during a sermon or a session meeting or whatever the case might be. So I decided to prioritize, instead of focusing on, what's the right information and what should you believe. And I tried to instead focus on, regardless of what you believe, regardless of what your approach is, how should we treat one another as Christians? Whether you're a Trump voter, whether you're a Biden voter, whether you are actively at the Capitol on January 6th, or whether you are utterly appalled at what you hear the next day, like wherever you stand on any spectrum, whatever your beliefs, which, right, like I'm not trying to say that there's not all of those are always going to be defensible Christian positions, right? It's not just do whatever you want, but regardless of what you believe, how should we treat one another? So if you're a Biden voter, if you're a Trump voter, how should you then respond to one another, more so than focus on who should you vote for? That was my approach from the pulpit, from, I guess, kind of a pastoral standpoint. If I had a chance to connect with people one-on-one, I would process a bit more about, what should you believe as a Christian? Who should we vote for? How should we handle these protests, et cetera, as Christians? But the main thing I addressed was, regardless of where you stand, how should we treat one another as believers? How can we strive for the unity of the faith, even if we're on the opposite ends of the spectrum with one another when it comes to pandemic or politics or whatever the case? And it's my belief that if we can cultivate that virtue, that will serve us far better than if we can cultivate a lot of people who agree with us. Mm-hmm. Because if the world can see a church of people on disparate political spectrums that still love one another and get along, I think that's a far better testimony than people who all believe the same thing. So that's kind of been my focus, preaching wise and writing wise, for the past, when those events would come. I would try to make space for people on both ends of the spectrum, but speak into how to approach and treat one another.
Yeah, that's a really good question, John. And it's sometimes it's hard to approach those topics in church, just because, what Steve was saying, you do have people on different sides of the spectrum with varying beliefs. And so it does boil down to that. We do have our faith, which is in common, and that unites us. But still, sometimes the issues that are very real and present in the world, well, they are very real and present and important. And sometimes they kind of take over us, and they become what we are really involved in. And I appreciate people that do have, a passion for some of these topics, people who are passionate about it. I think if the passion is there, it means something to them, and we should listen. And so I don't know what you guys are going to think about this or not, but just in kind of like the last year and a half that I've been here, and just developing sermon series and reading the word, stuff like that. I've been reading more and more and just coming more and more to the understanding that, and I don't know, this might sound wrong, but it's not about this world. It's about the next world. Not saying that we don't love each other in the present, and that we don't fight for what's right in the present, and we don't stand up for those that need help in the present. But when Jesus came, he didn't come to topple the Roman Empire. He left it there with all of its, glory and corruption. He left Rome there, and he was killed by the Romans. And so I think that we need to do what is right. Our faith should inform our decisions, of course. But I've also just been reading, when I read the scriptures, as Jesus is talking about, my kingdom is not of this world.
Right.
And it's about standing firm until the end, holding on to faith. And it is that race, it is that fight that Paul is talking about, and endurance, and this life is gonna test you on those things, but you have to hold on to your knowledge of Christ. And if you can do that, you're going to reach the other side. And it's not about, like, we can have all the wonderful ideas in the world and we'll end up building the Tower of Babel. I do believe, again, it have to hold all of it in balance. God gives each of us gifts and talents, and as a Presbyterian, I believe that each of us are sent into the workforce or wherever we find ourselves in life to be ministers of the word. We don't have to be ordained to do that, but we can have an influence wherever God sends us. So I believe that 110%, but I believe like 1,000,000%. Just the more and more I read the scriptures, and maybe it's because the different letters that Paul writes and stuff like that really are talking about, laying low in the face of persecution and, holding on to your faith despite the temptations and trials of the world. But that's just been what I've gleaned in my study the last year or so. We can try to solve the problems in this world, but it's about when God comes back, then he makes everything right. And we have to believe that he's in control and he has a plan and a purpose for our lives. Our lives are messy and the world is messy, but he has a plan and a purpose for you as an individual and for the world at large. And that's just kind of what I've been focusing on. And I hope my congregation isn't sick of hearing it, but I've really been trying to get them to see like, it's not about what you see out here in the world. It's about tapping into the beyond. And I've also been reading I've gone back and read like the Chronicles of Narnia and stuff like that. And there is the wardrobe that takes us somewhere else. We have to see beyond this mortal plane, or we're going to perish with it. Yeah. And so that's really what I've been focusing on. And again, it's not at the neglect of the issues of this day and age, but I think that the issue of all history is that we have to be getting ready for the world to come. And we want to be get ourselves right with God, thanks to Christ and what he's done for us. Yeah. And live with him eternal. I mean, that's the message right there. Sorry, I didn't mean to preach.
Well, we are pastors, so. One of the things, one second. One of the things that I've been focusing on is this idea of the Jesus life and the Jesus way that Eugene Peterson talks about. Eugene Peterson in Christ Plays in 10,000 Places talks about this idea of the Jesus way. That way is one that incorporates both humble service in the face, or no matter, in the face of adversity, in the face of whatever, humble service in general to those around us, and also being mindful of the fact that this world is not the end, that whatever happens here, God is still sovereign. And so we have to live the Jesus life in the Jesus way by the Jesus means, and Jesus is the way that we've been given, and he is the means by which we live that life. And so I've been hitting that really hard, but also having to address, there are attitudes that are present in probably all of our churches, whether people realize they hold them or not, that are distinctly anti-biblical, and even opposed to Jesus, like absolutely the opposite of what Jesus taught. And so addressing that, because, if we reject him, that includes his teachings, then he rejects us. That's his own words. So I've been focusing on that a lot in the midst of all this. And I also preached a series during election season on trust, on who you're going to trust, and went through some of the Isaiah narrative and talked about how we are called to trust God and God alone. And when we trust man, it never ends well for the church. And no man, whether it be Donald Trump or Joe Biden, was going to fix what ails the church in the United States. And so the only option we really have is a Jesus life in the Jesus way. So, all right. Any final thoughts?
There's one line that's been really helpful for me the past few months, coming from one of those conversations with my friend Sue, which is, there is no should. We're in a completely unprecedented time where the word should doesn't quite apply in the same way. Like when I started, it was like, okay, I should work this amount of hours a week. I should see this many people. I should make this many phone calls. And right there, I'm not trying to say that morality is relative or anything like that, or that there are no things that we should do. But I think that phrase has given me a lot of freedom. When I'm running low on steam, it's offered me a chance to give grace to myself. Maybe in a normal world setting, yes, I should be working X amount of hours, or I should be doing X amount of things. But right now, when there's just so much, right, everything's just kind of chaotic and up in the air. That's been a really restorative phrase for me. It's helped me to offer some grace to myself when I'm frustrated because I can't quite do or perform to the standard that I've set for myself. So that's my closing thought. We're in a season where there are some shoulds, but there's a lot of flexibility for what things should look like right now.
You should prepare your sermon every week.
Yeah.
How you do it is up to you. Mike, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I thought, Steve, that was really great what you said there. And the way I look at it, like there's so much going on right now, but there's also not a lot going on right now. And so I think that we do have to give ourselves grace on what we are able to accomplish each and every day. For me, if I could share any word with a young pastor that might end up listening to this or anything like that, the biggest thing that I've taken away in this year and a half of ministry is to love the flock that God has given to me and really get to know them, and not just in a small talk chit chat on Sunday morning, but make that intention to get to know them, especially if you don't agree with them, and especially if they have a personality or tendencies that kind of rub you the wrong way. And we kind of joked, when I came down here, I'm a Yankee, and these are, people that live in Appalachia. There are definitely some cultural differences. I'm an adopted Asian. My congregation is 100% white. But we love each other. And if there's and this is something I'm passionate about. It's like we need to take the opportunity to get to know each and every person in our congregation, because you want them to know that you're there for them. I think that's what Jesus is trying to get across to Peter when he kept asking him, "Do you love me? Do you love me?" And he's like, "You need to feed my lambs." And Jesus repeated that over and over again. And we do have such a wonderful and terrifying call, to whether our congregation is big or small. But if all of us do pastor smaller congregations, and that's so valuable, because in a small church, you do have that opportunity to spend that quality time with people. And so that'd be my plea just for anybody. Don't write anybody off when you're a pastor in your church, but really get a chance to know them, and hopefully you'll earn their trust, and they'll know that you'll be there. And I'm not very good at that. I'm still learning and getting better at that. But I think that's so valuable, more than a good sermon, more than a fog machine in worship. If the people know that you're there for them, that's what it's all about.
No fog machines. I like the sound of that. No fog machines. I think my biggest takeaway this year has probably just been, don't glory steal. It's so easy as pastors to think we're the only ones that can do the work, and that's just not the case. We are called to the reason deacons were elected in the early church was so that the pastors, the apostles, could focus on the ministry of the word and the prayers. So there's a responsibility to one another, and we've had some great people making sure that even though I can't be expected to make all the calls, be the technical guy, do most of the technical stuff during the week, and still devote 15 hours to a sermon. They've been really good about making sure the family stays together, because that's not something that one person can do by themselves. And so it's opened up the door to not be what my regional pastor calls a glory thief, where you are the only one doing all the work in the church and your people are just spectators. And this pandemic gives you a chance to really shift that focus to say, look, all hands have to be on deck. This can't be done one person, and no church can function, especially in the new age, where the post-Christian age we're living in now. No church can function on just the pastor alone. So that has been a big help to me, as tired as I am. The fact that I know I have people who are checking in with each other and walking with people is big. So everybody, thank you. We hope that this was edifying for you. If you are a young pastor and would like to talk more with me, shoot me an email from the God's Heart page on the contact section. And Mike and Steve, thank you.
Thanks for having us, John.
Yeah, great to be here.
I appreciate you guys, and we will be back next week with our new co-host, Katie Mason. We will do this again. Adios, everybody.